What is the most bullet reason for a teacher to give you a bad grade? Because he didn't read my paper. It was a university class where a Tay was responsible for grading the papers. He was clearly overwhelmed and just reading introductions and grading based on them alone. I had a 2-part introduction that fully addressed the prompt, but as he only read the first part I got my paper back with a big C at the top. I ended up getting full credit after I challenged the initial grade. Glad you had a better result. My first large college paper, for a pre-Civil War history class, freshman year came back with a giant red D written on it with practically no feedback. I was in a writing program and I had always excelled at essays, so I was sort of shocked. Went to the professor and asked him about the grade and lack of instruction. He sighed, looked down and said, "Westhoff, I don't like you." He went on and on after that with some bullet reasons, but apparently the big issue came from the first week of class. He was talking about manifest destiny and said something like, "Now you have to remember, back in those days there were 5,100 miles between towns out in the western USA. And I raised my hand and said that there was yesterday I learned 5,100 miles between towns in the western US. He said I was exaggerating and I told him I wasn't, because that's where I grew up. That paper was 40% of our grade. He refused to change the grade or even reread it. I scraped a C+ in that class and I was so freaking proud of that grade even though it was the worst grade I received in my life. At the end of the semester, I decided to ask him for his grading documentation to see if I could challenge the paper with the school, but he claimed he had already thrown it away. I found out later that was bullet 2, but I didn't press any further. You should have pressed, at the very least, so he doesn't try that bullet with someone else. Agreed. Had similar thing happen. Prof didn't like me, cause of my beard. Went to Dean. Dean tried talking to him. He refused to do anything. Dean sent my paper to another prof at our sister school who taught the same class. She reviewed it and graded it, went from a D to a B+. I forgot to cite something and I had a few, 2-3, spelling errors. Dean submitted the new grade instead, which gave me a B overall in the class. Wrote in Chicago format and lost points. The assignment instructions said to write in Chicago format. This reminds me of an assignment in which lost marks for not double spacing my work. I did double space my work. Back before I learned that double spacing meant 2 space between lines, I thought it meant between words. No one ever told little old me, and that just made sense to me. A space goes between 2 words, so a double space paper must have 2 between them. She gave me a 0 because she didn't think I read the book. She said I would have gotten a 75% if she thought I read it. 75% of the test questions right supposedly means I didn't actually do the reading. Still one of those things that pisses me off even 10 years later. Why wouldn't you give her a verbal synopsis of the book when she said you didn't read it? Because they didn't read it, clearly. But how do you know I didn't read it? Are you talking back to me, young man? I'm legit asking you. Don't take that tone with me. Defend myself with facts and logic. Adult. I'm sorry, I don't speak disrespect. As a high school freshman I think I was too intimidated to challenge her. I regret not making a bigger deal about it at the time. It really hurt my confidence with some teachers in the following year. Literally the first day of school she went around the classroom and asked how many books each of us read over the summer. I said 6. She asked seriously? But really, how many? 6? Why is that so hard to believe? I don't know exactly why. She just didn't like me. I never really had an issue with any other teacher and I was a pretty good student. I have my suspicions of why she didn't like me. A class most students breezed through with an A and reading SparkNotes was a class she micromanaged me like a hawk in. Still baffles me to this day, but it is what it is. In the 90s my family didn't have a computer and I had no access to one. I spent a lot of time on a handwritten assignment for school and the teacher gave me a B, writing as a comment, "I would have given you an A if you had typed it up on a computer." I'm still bitter. I knew a girl in the early 2000s who used a typewriter because she didn't have a printer or a floppy disk reader in her computer. Back then in school we were offered an optional class to learn 10-finger typing. It would be done on typewriters in the school, but we would also get homework assignments. My parents didn't have a typewriter or a computer, so I signed up for that course hoping I could talk my parents into getting a computer. Of course they got a typewriter instead, which they had no use for. At the end of the class I was the only one who didn't get the best possible grade, because my homework assignments would have typos in them. The rest of the children had computers at home and would use Word with autocorrect to type out the assignments. So everyone besides me got full points on all assignments. I have no idea how the teacher didn't notice this, but I was not one to tell on others. My mum got petty cash in college as a proofreader and typed out classmates' papers on a typewriter. 2 pool. B. My teacher lost my coursework on the bus home. I refused to redo a year's worth of work in 3 weeks and I got taken from an A to a C. Bullet. School sided with him. What kind of school allows a teacher to, I assume, admit they lost coursework and have the school go, oh well, student's fault, minus points? That makes no sense to me. This happened at my secondary school as well. The teacher won't admit to losing the work and then it becomes you versus them on if you actually submitted it, or they lost it. I've never seen a student win this argument. Had something similar happen to me in high school. My portfolio coursework was 2 pieces of work worth about 40% of my overall mark went missing before the final marking alongside the exam. Checked everywhere in the classroom. Can't remember what qualification I ended up getting as the school had to appeal with what marking the school had of earlier work. They weren't a bad teacher, but I feel bad that they ended up no longer working on the craft design department when we all came back after the summer. Still feel like I am partly responsible for that. My art portfolio got burned. As in, fire ate my homework. The fire didn't even singe anyone else's, but mine was completely destroyed. During the final week, some arsehole tossed flaming molotovs at a school building. I got given 2 choices. Redo 60 pieces, 10 month, and get an extra 2 weeks, totaling 3 weeks, to do it in. Or, be judged on all my prior work which hadn't shown my improvement over the 2 years. The portfolio was worth 60% of my grade. The teacher was nice and told me straight up if I chose the later I'd probably end up with a C at best, but that they thought I could do better. In retrospect, I should have taken it, instead of trying to redo everything in so short a time. I broke my right arm in 3rd grade. I write with my right hand. The teacher gave me a bad grade, because my handwriting with my left hand was barely legible. In 3rd or 4th grade, some girl in my class broke her right arm and the teacher did the same it to her. And after the poor girl got upset about it, the teacher compromised by assigning some other girl to do her writing for her. They both had to sit at the very back of the room together so the one girl could quietly dictate to the other all of her writing needs. Everything from multiple choice stuff to full-on creative writing assignments. And the girl who had to do the writing still also had to do her own work and was given no extra time as far as I know. That is terrible. I would feel bad for the other girl if that happened to me. Right around the same age I knew someone who broke their right arm during the school year and had to do all their assignments left-handed. I saw how difficult it was for them and thought, wow, I better start practicing writing with my left just in case. This is the only reason I'm pseudo-ambidextrous now. I never broke anything, knock on wood, but as an adult I did manage to get tendonitis in my right wrist working on a project with a deadline, and that's the only time my practice came in handy. No pun intended. Intend your puns, weakling. That's crazy, but it helped you in the long run and that's the best part. I would hate to be in that situation again. In high school, I used the word lascivious to describe a character in a book and my teacher didn't know what the word meant. So logically, he took off a point. Oh my god, you just reminded me of the time my high school teacher didn't believe unison was a word. That's ridiculous. She should know a unison is one buffalo standing by itself. If there are 2 buffaloes then it's bison. You just reminded me of a teacher that thought evinced was just a misspelling and took off points. Still salty about that. They corrected the burden of proof to the burden of providing proof. I have a school nurse story. In high school I had really bad menstrual cramps and 1 month was particularly bad. Nurse didn't want to let me go home because the world doesn't stop just for cramps. I put up a fit and she eventually let me go home. Few hours later I was in the ER with appendicitis smiley face. Not a bad grade, but I remember I was so close to being the first person to ever score a 100% on my 10th grade Spanish final. The one question I got wrong was, ¿Qué tipo de comida es el pescado? What type of food is fish? A. El carne, meat. B. La fruta, fruit. C. El pan, bread. D. La verdura, vegetable. I of course picked meat, and got it wrong. Because my teacher insisted that fish isn't meat. She's a Catholic and eats fish on Fridays during Lent. According to her the correct answer is fruit. Because fish are sometimes known as the fruit of the sea. What the actual frick? Cram your 99%, Sonora. I've had bad Spanish teachers, but what?